Pokemon's new game, Pokemon Champions, launched today, and here's what the Pokemon community is saying about it. Shofu, one of the top Pokemon creators on YouTube, is calling it inferior to Showdown, which is a free fan-made website. Joe Merrick, the guy who's run Cerebi since 1999, is calling the launch whiplash because of how unfinished it is compared to Pokopia. And Wolfie is the #1 competitive Pokemon YouTuber on the planet who can't even play the game. All of this within 6 hours of launch. This is the game the Pokemon company says is the future of competitive Pokemon for the next decade. The platform official tournaments are going to run on. Pokemon Champions had years in development, full backing from the biggest franchise on earth, and it's missing Pokemon running at 30 frames per second on Switch 2, missing items, missing features, has day one microtransactions, and for some players it's literally not even working. Shofu is right. The worst part about this is that a free fan website from 2011 does all of this better. Now I want to be really clear about something before we go any further, because on a day like today it would be easy to write this off as Twitter being Twitter. Launch day hot takes, loud vocal minorities, you know, the usual internet noise, but that's not what's happening here. The list of high profile members of the Pokemon community criticizing Pokemon Champions is seemingly endless. Here's A-Drive and Central Leaks. These are not random haters farming engagement off a trending hashtag. And if we're being honest, Wolfie being unable to even play Pokemon Champions is almost poetic. He is a Pokemon world champion. He's the biggest competitive Pokemon YouTuber on the planet. His entire career, his entire livelihood is competitive Pokemon. If there's one content creator on planet Earth who was built in a lab to love Pokemon Champions, it's this guy. And 6 hours after launch, he can't play the game. That's right, folks. The best competitive Pokemon player on YouTube literally can't play the game that's supposed to be the future of competitive Pokemon. Everyone we've talked about here are not the people who just complain for clicks. These are the people who show up for Pokemon every single time through every rough patch this franchise has ever had, and all of them on the same day within hours of each other are telling you something is wrong. That's not just Twitter noise, that's the Pokemon community agreeing that things are seriously wrong. So let's jump right in and figure out what went wrong with Pokemon Champions, starting with the main thing you're supposed to do in the game: battle with competitive Pokemon. The roster is the first thing that tells you this game is unfinished. Pokemon Champions launched today with 185 usable Pokemon. 185 out of over 1,000 in the game that's supposed to be the definitive competitive Pokemon experience for the next decade. And I want you to really absorb that number, because I'm about to give you some context for it that sounds like I'm making it up. Pokemon Stadium 2 launched on the Nintendo 64 in the year 2000 with more Pokemon than Pokemon Champions has in 2026. A game that came out on a console with a cartridge 26 years ago, when Pokemon had just crossed the 250 mark total, somehow managed to fit more of its roster into a dedicated battle game than the Pokemon company managed today with modern hardware, cloud infrastructure. Now, to be fair, the Pokemon company has said that the roster is going to expand over time. More Pokemon will be added. This is the launch roster, not the final roster. But here's the thing. This is a game that's positioning itself as the future of competitive Pokemon. Competitive Pokemon has seasons, it has tournaments, it has an entire ecosystem of players who build their teams around specific Pokemon, specific items, specific strategies. So we'll add more later doesn't help the player whose main Pokemon isn't in the game on day one of the first competitive season. And for the players watching who know what that actually means, Porygon 2, Dusclops, Clefairy, Electabuzz, Magmar, the entire Eviolite archetype, none of them are in, and the Pokemon company hasn't said anything about when they're going to be added. That's how bad this is. Some of those Pokemon are like an entire pillar of the competitive team building scene that's existed since at least Gen 5, and it's just gone. Look who came to say hi. Tiger said if you guys made it this far into the video, you should definitely leave a like, because she wants to get some treats later, and she knows that 1 like equals 1 treat. Isn't that right, Tiger? In all seriousness though, I do want to take a moment to thank everybody who's been liking the videos lately and using the new hype feature. It really helps out small channels like mine a ton, so thank you. Okay, so the roster is small, the items are restricted, but the Pokemon that are in the game, they've got the big new feature the Pokemon company spent an entire year marketing, right? The return of the Mega Evolution. That was the headline. That's the reason we were all excited in the first place, especially coming off of Pokemon Legends ZA, right? Like that's been the big thing. Oh my god, Megas are back. Yeah, about that. The return of Mega Evolutions was like the whole marketing push of Pokemon Legends EA last year, and so having that transition into Pokemon Champions was like a slam dunk. For Legends EA, every trailer, every showcase, every promotional beat for that game was built around we're bringing back Mega Evolution, and by the way, with brand new forms you've never seen before. That was the pitch, that was the hook, that was the reason a lot of people even came back to Pokemon and tried out Legends EA in the first place. So naturally, with Pokemon Champions, it's the thing that the Pokemon company delivered almost the worst. A bunch of the new Mega Evolutions players were specifically looking forward to aren't even in Pokemon Champions. Mega Garchomp Z, Mega Lucario Z, Mega Absol Z, Mega Heatron, Mega Darkrai, Mega Zygarde, Mega Baxcalibur. These are the Pokemon that the Pokemon company themselves used in marketing for their recent games, and they're not in Pokemon Champions. No timeline when they'll be added, by the way, no explanation for why they're missing. They just aren't in the game you downloaded today, and the ones that are in the game, well, a lot of them are actually worse than their base forms. I want you to think about how insane that sentence is for a second. The whole point of a Mega Evolution is that it's a stronger, more powerful version of the Pokemon. That's the entire concept. Mega evolve your Pokemon, it gets stronger, that's the trade. Except in Champions, some of these new Megas, that's not what happens. There's a tweet going around right now from a VGC player called Splashplate. They said 99% of the new Mega Pokemon finally have their abilities revealed, and they're direct downgrades to their base form. What the F do you mean, Stalwart Mega Skarmory? Pokemon Champions is the gift that keeps giving right now. Then we've got the infamous Logic song playing in the background, okay? If you know, you know. But the comments, no guard Mega Hawlucha. This user says, can we please talk about innards out Mega Victory Bell, please? Like, what is that? Okay, all right, maybe some of these changes are for like balance reasons, or maybe we'll learn more about it in the future. But while we're here, while we're talking about balance, they also quietly removed Life Orb, Choice Band, and Choice Specs. Those are the three like most common competitive items in the entire franchise. Staples of competitive Pokemon for the better part of 2 decades gone. Not announced, not explained. Players just found out by logging in and not finding them. Here's a list of the items in the game brought to you by Cerebi, okay? At least we've got Choice Scarf, I guess, but like this list is shockingly short. I mean, that's it. Then we go into the Mega Stones, and then we've got berries at the bottom here, which is fine, but like these are all the items in the game. That's it. We're done. And again, we have the founder of Cerebi tweeting earlier, I've got to say the lack of items options is going to hurt this game in the short term, and I think very much damage VGC in general when VGC shifts over next month. What on earth were they thinking? Users are replying, Rocky Helmet being the shop icon but not in the shop is wild. This user says this has the feeling of a disgustingly long drip feed content model, and I think they hit the nail on the head here. This user says, you know something's terribly wrong when Joe's criticizing Pokemon, and that's what I said earlier. Joe's entire career is based off of Pokemon itself. He's not supposed to be a critic of this stuff. This user says they really killed all the hype within an hour of its release. Ilka is an embarrassment to the franchise, failure after failure. For those of you that don't know, Ilka are the brilliant minds behind Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which everyone agrees is pretty much the worst Pokemon remakes or remasters or whatever that we've ever seen. This user says, I think I would rather stay on Scarlet and Violet. But all right, maybe, just maybe, all of these changes would be easier to forgive if the game itself actually ran really well, if the core experience, you know, Pokemon in an arena taking taking turns using moves felt smooth and polished and an upgrade over the last games. I mean, how hard can it be to run a turn-based battle at a good frame rate in 2026? Apparently, it's very hard for them to figure this stuff out, which brings me to my next point: 30 frames per second on Switch 2, and for some players, the game is literally broken. That's right, folks. On Nintendo's latest and greatest hardware, the Switch 2, Pokemon Champions runs at 30 frames per second, and I want to put that into context, okay? Because on its own, it's like, okay, it's 30 frames per second. Doesn't sound that damning, right? Lots of games run at 30. What makes this damning is what else runs on the Switch 2. Pokemon Legends ZA came out 6 months ago. ZA is an open world game. It's tiny, right? It's a tiny open world, but it is a full city. It has NPCs wandering around. It has real-time combat. It has exploration, if you can call it that. It's got a day and night cycle and environments to display, and ZA runs at a locked 60 frames per second in battles on Switch 2. Pokemon Champions is not an open world game. It does not have a city to render. There are no NPCs wandering around. There's no real-time combat. There's a lobby, a menu, and 2 Pokemon standing on a flat arena taking turns. That's it. That's the whole game. And it runs at half the frame rate of a game that does 10 times as much on the exact same hardware. 6 months later, by the way. And if you guys have watched my channel for any amount of time, I've been like the biggest critic of Legends ZA. I think that game is a pile of garbage. And here I am talking about Pokemon Champions, and somehow I'm sitting here telling you that Pokemon Champions is a bigger technical failure than Pokemon Legends ZA, and that was like the #1 thing people talked about with ZA, is how absolutely atrocious that game looked. It looked bad, it played bad, especially on the Switch 1, and somehow, just by some almost miracle, Pokemon Champions is even worse while doing even less. And like, look, okay, 30 frames per second. Okay, let's just reel it in here for a second. Okay, 30 frames per second, that would be survivable. Okay, it's the Pokemon community we're talking about. The bar isn't super high to begin with. 30 frames per second, it's annoying, but at least it's playable, right? Except for a bunch of players, the game isn't even doing that. It's just broken, which brings me to the moment that I think is going to define this launch for a lot of people. I talked about this earlier in the video, but Wolfie Glick, and I want to remind you who that is because it matters. Okay, if you guys aren't aware of the competitive Pokemon scene, Wolfie is a Pokemon world champion. He is the biggest competitive Pokemon YouTuber on the planet. This is a guy whose literal job is playing competitive Pokemon. And like I said, he posted this morning that he's completely soft locked out of Pokemon Champions. He started a new save file and tried a different profile, and he's getting the same issue. It's just he clicks begin matchmaking and it says it's in progress, and then it just fails. He cannot play the game, right? And the funniest part is this top comment here: while a soft lock is pretty bad, I think Wolfie running Quick Claw Hydreigon is an even bigger sign that something went very wrong during development, which you could see right here on the screen. It's a Hydreigon with Quick Claw. Like, look, just take a second and think about how bad this actually looks, okay? The best known competitive Pokemon creator on Earth on launch day of the game that's supposed to host competitive Pokemon for the next 10 years can't play the game. If Wolfie is running into a soft lock that's bad enough to post about to his hundreds of thousands of followers, how many other players are hitting the same wall right now and just don't have a platform to say anything about it? Now look, I know what you're thinking, right? This isn't a $60-$70 retail game. This isn't a big AAA launch that you paid full price for and you feel cheated by. Pokemon Champions is free to play, which sounds generous, right? And it's a business model that's been around forever. Of course, I'm no stranger to free to play games, but let's just take a quick deep dive into what free to play means for the context of this Pokemon game. For a lot of people, free to play is one of those phrases that now mostly means we're gonna sell you things inside the game instead of up front, and Pokemon Champions is really just a perfect example of that. The game has a battle pass, free and premium tracks, the standard split you've seen in every live service game for the last, I don't know, 10 years. When did Fortnite come out, right? The problem is what's on the premium tracks. Some of the Mega Stones, the items you need to actually use Mega Evolution in battle, the headline feature of recent Pokemon games like ZA, these are gated behind the paid premium pass, which means in a competitive game where having access to the full roster of tools is the entire point, some of those tools literally cost money in a game that the Pokemon Company is telling you is the future of competitive Pokemon. Now, this video is from Video Game News, and they show the actual premium battle pass here. It's $10, and you can see the items here with this little golden ticket are the ones that are premium pass only. Okay, so you get Embor with the premium pass, and then you get the Emborite, which is like his Mega Stone. This is part of the premium pass. You have to pay to get the Emborite. And would you look at that, Feraligatr is also a premium battle pass item, and oh, what do you know, Feraligatr is also a paid item here. Okay, so in a game where it's all about being competitive, it's like, oh, sorry, it's competitive only if you pay, right? Which, like, look, again, I'm not the biggest hater of free-to-play games. You guys know this, okay? I'm all about value proposition. So if the game is fantastic but it's free to play, I don't really have a problem with that, right? Especially because games right now are $60, $70, $80. So like, okay, in a vacuum, yes, it would not be a big problem to me. I know a lot of people hate live service games, and like, I can see why, but I'm not that big of a hater of them if the value proposition is there. But remember, look how far into this video we are. Look at all the other problems that Pokemon Champions has on day one, and then they have the audacity to charge you for the complete package, right? The premium battle pass model only works if the game is giving you good value, and so far the game is like literally broken. And in other free-to-play games, right, they're just casual experiences like Fortnite. Fortnite is not really a competitive shooter. It's just like a fun third-person shooter that you play with the boys after work or after school. Pokemon Champions is supposed to be a competitive game. So pay to compete is a phrase I really don't like using, but it's hard to describe this any other way. And that's before you get to Pokemon Home. If you want to bring the Pokemon you've spent years raising in the mainline games over to Champions, which by the way is one of the main selling points the Pokemon Company used to market this game, you basically need a Pokemon Home premium subscription to do it at any reasonable scale. The free version of Pokemon Home holds 30 Pokemon. 30. If you've been playing mainline Pokemon for any amount of time, you probably have more than 30 Pokemon you care about. So there's another soft paywall between you and the thing the Pokemon Company told you the game was built to do. The biggest, most valuable entertainment franchise on the earth, by the way, went to free to play, and the first thing they did was put a paywall between you and the gameplay. Oh, and one more thing, while we're on the subject of controversial design calls, they removed IVs entirely. Now, for the uninitiated, IVs are a stat system that has been in Pokemon since like 1999 in some form or fashion. The modern IV system, I think, was added in Gen 3, Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, but they're one of the layers of depth that make competitive team building feel like actual team building, and Champions just cut them. Now, internal reporting leaks from the dev team says that this decision caused heated discussions inside the studio, meaning people who worked on the game tried to push back on this, but they decided to ship that anyway. And you're gonna hear me say this phrase a few more times before this video is over. They shipped it anyway, okay? Because by this point in the video, you can probably feel the pattern forming. So let me ask the question I think you're already asking. How does a franchise this big with this much money, this much time, this much audience goodwill, this much to lose, ship a game this undercooked, this rushed, this broken on day one? What is actually happening at the Pokemon Company right now? The answer is kind of sitting in plain sight, and to see it, we only have to look at what Pokemon released like 4 or 5 weeks ago. Last month in March, Pokemon fans were happy. I don't know if you remember that because it feels like a long time ago after today, but a couple of weeks ago, the entire Pokemon community was celebrating because Pokemon Pokopia had just launched, the cozy Pokemon spin-off, the charming little game about building and exploring, and it was great. Well-reviewed, well-loved, polished, full of personality. It reminded a lot of people why they fell in love with Pokemon in the first place. And that goodwill was still sitting in the tank this morning when Pokemon Champions launched, and then Champions kind of torched it in like 6 hours. That's the whiplash Joe was talking about that I mentioned earlier in the video. That's why a guy who has spent 26 years running Cerebi is using a word that strong on launch day. Going from the highest high the Pokemon fans have had in years to this in just a couple of weeks is genuinely disorienting. And when one of the most measured voices in the Pokemon community is feeling this way, most most people are probably feeling this way. Now look, I know Pokemon Pokopia and Pokemon Champions are two totally different genres of game. I understand that. One of them is a cozy $70 Animal Crossing Minecraft hybrid with Dragon Quest builders looped in there, right? Okay, and the other is a free-to-play competitive turn-based battling game, okay? But let me just take this one step further, because the whiplash here isn't the full story. The full story is why Pokopia was good and why Champions is like this. And if you've been paying attention to the development side of Pokemon, it's right there in front of you. Pokopia, and I've talked about this in my previous videos, it was mainly developed by Omega Force at Koei Tecmo. Omega Force is a top-tier studio. These are the people who made Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, the full Dynasty Warriors series, Fire Emblem Warriors, Dragon Quest builders. This is a team that Nintendo trusts with Zelda, which is their most precious IP outside of Mario himself. That's the caliber of studio the Pokemon Company handed Pokopia to. Pokemon Champions was developed by Ilka, and if you're a big Pokemon fan, you know that name because Ilka's last Pokemon project was Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, widely considered one of the worst received mainline Pokemon games in the modern era. A game so criticized for being lazy and low effort that it's literally become a running joke in the Pokemon community for years now. Now look, I'm not here to just dunk on Ilka as much as I want to do that, okay? They're a studio just doing their job that they were hired to do. The question that matters isn't, is Ilka good or bad? The question is, why did the Pokemon Company give them this assignment? Because look at what just happened. The Pokemon Company handed their cozy, low-stakes side project spin-off to an elite studio, and they handed the game that's supposed to host competitive Pokemon for the next 10 years to a studio the fandom already didn't trust. This is not a scheduling accident. That is a statement about what the Pokemon Company actually cares about. And here's the part that makes it worse. Insiders are reporting that terrestrialization, one of the core Pokemon battle mechanics, was specifically cut from the launch of Champions so that the game could ship on time, meaning the Pokemon Company knew the game wasn't really ready. They knew that there were major features missing. They knew the community was going to notice, and they shipped it anyway. There's that phrase again, which brings me to the thing that should embarrass the Pokemon Company more than anything else I've said in this entire video. A free fan website from 2011 still does all of this better. Pokemon Showdown came out in October of 2011. Let me say that again. 2011. We were in the middle of Barack Obama's first term as president. The year the iPhone 4S came out. That's the Pokemon Showdown we're talking about. It is free. It runs in a web browser. It was built and is still maintained by volunteers. No budget, no Nintendo behind it, no marketing team, no corporate backing, no deadlines, no publisher. A bunch of people who loved Pokemon enough to build the thing themselves. And 15 years later, Pokemon Showdown has every Pokemon ever made, every item, every move, every competitive format you can think of. A team builder that works in about 30 seconds, battle replays that have existed in Showdown since the Royal Wedding and Occupy Wall Street. A spectator mode, cross-platform support by default because it runs in a web browser. It works on a decade-old laptop. It works on your phone. Even if it might be a worse experience and it's ill-advised, it just works. Pokemon Champions launched today with 185 Pokemon, a fraction of the competitive items, no replays, no spectator mode. It runs at 30 frames per second on Switch 2 and is currently soft locking the best known competitive Pokemon player on YouTube out of the game entirely. The Pokemon Company had 15 years to study Pokemon Showdown, 15 years to look at what a free fan project built with no resources was doing and build something better with infinite resources, infinite money, and infinite institutional knowledge of their own franchise. They had a decade and a half of runway, and what they shipped today is somehow worse than what fans built for free in 2011. Now, I want to be fair here, okay? Because I know the comment section is already typing. Yes, technically, Pokemon Champions lets you bring over over Pokemon from the mainline games, which Pokemon Showdown does not. And for some people, that means a lot. That's a real difference. That is a real thing that Champions does that Showdown can't. But when the trade-off for that one feature is losing 800 Pokemon, half the items, every modern feature, replay support, and a stable frame rate, the math just doesn't work, okay? Especially because the game is about competitive Pokemon. If you have to strip a game down to a quarter of what a fan project from 2011 offers just to add that one feature, you have not made a better product. You've just made a different one that's worse, which leaves the question the whole video has been building toward. How is this the future of competitive Pokemon? Because that is the whole problem. Everything I've just walked you through, the missing Pokemon, the weird abilities on Megas, the removed items, the 30 frames per second, some players being soft locked out of even playing the game, the paywalls, the removed IVs, the rush development, the embarrassment of losing to a fan website, all of that would be survivable if Pokemon Champions was a side project. If it was a fun little experiment the Pokemon Company was running on the side, a one-off, something the competitive community could take a look at, shrug, and skip until it got patched into something decent, something that you just play on your phone sometimes. But that's not what Pokemon Champions is. The Pokemon Company has said explicitly on the record that Champions is the platform official competitive Pokemon will run on going forward. The game that's supposed to host VGC for a long time, to quote them directly. This isn't a side game. This isn't an experiment. This is the infrastructure. This is the stage the next 10 years of competitive Pokemon tournaments are supposed to be played on, which means every single problem I've listed in this video is not a day one annoyance. It is a foundation problem. You cannot build a competitive scene on a platform that's missing most of the Pokemon, most of the items, most of the features, and crashes on the best player in the world. And this is why I keep coming back to Joe from Cerebi, because remember what he said today. The founder of Cerebi, the guy who has spent 26 years documenting every Pokemon game ever made, the most patient voice in the entire fandom pretty much, said VGC should stay on Scarlet and Violet until the next mainline game comes out. That is not a complaint. That's his tweet from 8 hours ago. I'm going to say it. VGC should be on Scarlet and Violet until Winds and Waves is out. It's undercooked. While I can deal with a limited Pokemon pool, there's barely any competitive items. Some mechanics are seemingly not working as intended or in a logical way. This game seems to have come in too hot. Thanks, Ilka. And by the way, this is not a complaint. This is not a hot take. This is his evacuation order. When the person who cares most about Pokemon succeeding is telling the competitive community to skip the competitive game, something has gone very, very wrong at the Pokemon Company. And the fact that it's happening on the day Champions launches to a game the entire competitive future of the franchise is supposed to be built on should scare everyone who loves this part of Pokemon. And by the way, from my perspective, this is just par for the course. Pokemon Pokopia was the outlier, being a well-reviewed game, okay? Legends EA, Scarlet and Violet, Sword and Shield, the better part of the last decade has been Pokemon releasing unfinished, undercooked, and underwhelming games. There's been a few exceptions with Legends Arceus and Pokemon Pokopia, but Pokemon Champions being horrible on day one was just what everyone should have expected. That's what Pokemon's been doing. And if you guys have been watching my channel for the last couple of months, you will not be surprised by pretty much any of this. But guys, if you made it to the end of the video, consider dropping a thumbs up on it. It really does help out the channel a ton. And you might think you're subscribed to the channel because you've seen a couple of my videos, but you're actually not. Double check down below.